College football nerds here to review Georgia and Florida, talk about what happened in this game and if it went kind of how we thought it would. But first, going to plug a couple of our other properties. We have a podcast. It's really an audio version of this show. It's on iTunes and Android platforms. And just the only drawback with it, y'all, is we don't get it out as quickly as we do the videos. Videos drop every Monday. Like clockwork, these audio versions usually don't get out till Wednesday, but some people like the podcast version more. If you do listen to us on the podcast version, please give us a review. It would help us out a ton. And also, if you like following your favorite team, college team in the NFL, on our website, collegefootballnerds.com, we have compiled in almost real time the NFL weekly statistics database as it's going on, as the games are going on, and it updates in real time, and it's grouped and sorted by college teams. So you go in there, you select Georgia, you select Florida, and it gives you defensive, offensive stats for the week, whatever week we're in. You can go back and look at previous weeks, or you can look at season totals to the date. We also compile, based on statistics alone, LBU, RBU, DBU, NFLU. So y'all might find that interesting. Again, collegefootballnerds.com. All right, Josh, enough of the plugs. Let's talk about what we saw in this game. I think you had it 27-17. Is that right?
I did.
27-17 turned out to be 24-17 for Georgia. I picked Florida. I said I was the kiss of death. Turned out to be the case, Florida fans. I'm sorry. I took the L for y'all. Josh, we got to talk about something. And it weren't good. I want to tell you a statistic. Y'all, if there's kids in the room, cover your ears because this is downright nasty. Georgia was 12 of 18 on third down. At one point, they were 8 of 10. Florida was 2 for 9 on third down. And honestly, for me, that's the game. For you, is that the game, or is there more to it?
Well, it's certainly a lot of the game. If you're converting 2 out of 3 third down conversions, you're doing pretty well. Now, we've seen teams lose games like this before. The biggest example that we have something like an hour-long video trying to explain it because it's so bizarre statistically was the national title where Alabama was actually converting third downs at an incredibly high clip, still managed to lose the game, still managed not to score many points. You typically need to have efficiency and explosiveness to win a football game. There's a lot of statistics on it. S&P does efficiency statistics, and they have something called ISO PPP. Normally, we'd cite a lot of those stats. This year, they're not available. There's legitimate reasons for it, but hopefully we'll have those again next year. This is an industry-wide problem. You just can't, have one team go that high, though, and then on the other hand, with Florida's case, you can't be 2 of 9. That's a complete inability to sustain drives. The fact that you have far less either means you're moving the ball really well, such that you don't get to third downs, but in this case, it's really not true. They just weren't sustaining drives. Georgia ran 67 plays in this game. Florida only ran 52. 15 plays doesn't sound like a lot, but it's about 2 sustained drives. Georgia just held the ball more, held it longer. And I think this gets into another point that we've discussed sort of ad nauseum. Jake Fromm and Georgia have issues, and I think their biggest issues are that they don't have a lot of proven targets as downfield receivers. But Florida's having some problems in really being able to stop teams from throwing the ball when they want to, especially underneath. I mean, Fromm was at 9.3 yards per. We can talk about that later. But I think the biggest thing in terms of third downs is I really think Florida just has some issues at linebacker. And they've got a little bit of issues at safety. Some of it was documented, the wheel route to Cager, where the guy gets lost trying to cover the deep third. But I think in general, Georgia kind of knew that they were going to be able to exploit guys at that middle level of the defense whenever they needed to, not throw deep, and for the most part able to convert first downs when the opportunity presented itself. That was the weakness. And the weakness, we had identified it. I don't know if we really talked about it on the video or if we talked about it on Twitter, but Miller, I had seen in the past had been a problem for him. Moon had been a past. I think Reese is a good linebacker, but you've got mid to low level 3-star guys starting at middle linebacker and outside linebacker for Florida, and athletically sometimes they're kind of outmatched. And then Reese is given so many responsibilities on the outside because he's the one guy they can kind of rely on, that you can really isolate Florida's safeties and linebackers. And a lot of times either the linebackers can't make the play, which is how you give up a lot of first downs, or the safeties are in a position where if they make any mistake, like 31 did at one point, then you're given a touchdown over the top. And it only takes a couple of those when you're not scoring 20 points to lose a game.
Yeah, and you flagged the linebacker issue a couple of weeks ago, and then you and I did a follow-up kind of film review session together, kind of prepping for the LSU-Alabama game, and it stuck out like a sore thumb. And not, Alabama's defense gets a lot of heat because of their middle linebacker issues with true freshmen, and they're in a lot better position, in my opinion. With the legitimate criticisms, they're in a lot better position than what I've seen from Florida. There was a 3rd and 14, which I really think started the string of third down conversions. There was a 3rd and 14 where you had, I think it was Cager, there was a wide receiver coming across the middle underneath the linebackers. The problem is underneath was like 9 yards, 10 yards off the ball, which you can play sticks a lot of times for routes that don't have any momentum. Like if somebody's running a 13-yard stop route on 3rd and 14, you can play sticks, but you can't play it there. And obviously the guy caught it and just ran it like 17 yards on 3rd and 14. They did do a good job. If we're putting something in Florida's favor for what they did. So Georgia stopped the run game almost entirely. Florida ran for 1.1 yards per carry, but Florida did not run the ball at all. They really didn't commit to the run. They threw it a lot. I say a lot. They didn't have that many plays in the game because they couldn't stay on the field. They couldn't convert third downs. Trask threw it 33 times. He actually was credited with 6 carries, which means 13 carries for the rest of the team. Trask, a lot of that was sacks. But DeAndre Swift, 86 yards rushing. One of those rushes was 30 yards. And even with that 30-yarder in his 86, he only ran for 3.4 yards per carry. Harrion struggled. Cook and Zamir White struggled. To me, this shows you what Florida linebackers can do well, and the Florida front four can do well. They can stop the run. The problem is, as you said, there's some athleticism issues, and honestly, another thing I saw that really impacted the third down situation was that pass rush. We thought getting Grenard and Zuniga back was going to really impact positively this pass rush, and I just didn't see it. And I saw, actually, I didn't see it and sort of reaffirm what we saw against LSU when they gave up 42. So is this a situation where Florida going forward, they can stop the run, but there's real concerns if they face a quarterback of any substance, even from a lesser team?
I think so. And we've seen it before in college football. I think on the outside, Florida's got good corners. I think what they really lack is 3 or 4 deep players kind of in the middle of the field to handle pass coverage, be it linebackers and safeties. I say 3 or 4 deep. You really need something around 8 players to play nickel, dime, both safeties, both linebackers. I'm not sure Florida has it at quality, and this is kind of a problem left over from McElwain. You mentioned the Alabama situation with their linebackers. I mean, Alabama's starting freshmen, but they're starting top 100 guys, and again, a lot of the guys that Florida's playing at linebacker right now are 3-star guys that were not top 500, and that's not to say that you're bad by default. But I think what it really says is that Florida does not have great options. And I've been critical. If you've watched our show, I pointed that out for a few years, that it's been by far the big Achilles heel for Florida, and I think it's showing its ugly face. I think Florida is probably going to be okay in a lot of games. I think they can probably stop the run. I'm not shocked that getting 2 players back doesn't change the world, because it often doesn't. But I think one of the interesting things to me when we went back and watched that film review, right, and we were prepping for the LSU game against Alabama and trying to see why LSU was as successful as they were, LSU did run all over Florida. And what we realized in going back and watching it, and we didn't see it until we were really zeroed in on this point, we were doing a lot of work on trying to focus on the RPO. We might actually put some content out about it because we have a lot of notes on it. The linebackers for Florida struggled with the RPO because they have a lot of extra responsibilities. You kind of have to cover the run and the pass, and what that means is you often have to cover receiver and then roll off to help with the run, and they weren't able to do that. And their problem against LSU was really actually an athleticism issue, not a physicality issue. I think Florida is going to be okay when they can play teams straight up and be physical and then leave their corners in boundary coverage. I think where they're going to struggle is when they face a good quarterback that can actually throw the ball in the short passing game such that you can sort of exploit the little deficiencies. Because, again, where the linebackers have really struggled is once they have to really play in space and they've got to be, they've got to read and react to plays, cover a guy, and then still be able to get back to the center of the field. It's asking too much of these guys right now. And I'm not trying to hate on them. I mean, they're doing the best job they can, but you have to realize the tools you're working with. Florida just has a little bit of a weakness in the middle of the field. And, a lot of quarterbacks aren't going to be able to exploit it. And when you look at Florida's schedule this year, I think you can kind of safely question who's going to be able to give that an issue because, Vandy ain't going to do it. I don't think Florida State has a quarterback. And, Kelly Bryant, maybe you might see something there with his own read game, which will give him an issue, or an RPO game again. But they're way too inconsistent. So I do think Florida might actually be able to turn it around and never really see this rear its head again, even in a bowl game. But it's a definite problem, and it's one that's only going to be solved by recruiting.
All right, let's talk Georgia for a minute. You mentioned in your top 10, in our top 10 video, we do a top 10 video every week now, y'all. Go watch it. That you didn't drop Georgia that far after the South Carolina loss. It was a reasonable ding that they took from everybody when they did drop, but you noted that they didn't really trail in the game. It's not like the Oklahoma game where they're losing by 25 in the fourth quarter. South Carolina's not a horrible team, and it's fair to say South Carolina with a easier schedule, they have the hardest schedule I think I've ever seen. With an easier schedule, has a lot cleaner record. For you, in this game, I guess for me, I'll start. I have some concerns about the run game, given that they've needed to rely so much on it. It's fair. Like, they've got a lot of talent at running back, what we thought to be a pretty physical offensive line, and not had to lean on, or not been able to lean on from, at least in this offensive system this year. For me, the positives are Jake Fromm, 9.3 yards per attempt against a good Florida defense. My concerns are the running game. We saw South Carolina kind of be able to bottle up the running game. We've seen Florida be able to do it. I don't think Georgia's winning the SEC championship and making it in the playoffs unless they can get that running game going. Do you think differently? Do you think maybe they can lean on Jake Fromm? And I'll ask you specifically because I think Jake Fromm's an NFL quarterback. Do you think they can lean on Jake Fromm in the current offensive system that's been anemic at times this year, or are they going to have to be able to run for 200 yards in a game to win against an Alabama, LSU, or somebody in the playoff?
Well, this goes back to the earlier point I made about the passing game with Florida. What Georgia has to do on the ground is really predicated by what they can do through the air. I don't think there's any doubt that getting Cager back was a major impact. We talked about its effect with the South Carolina game, other parts of their schedule. Without the ability to throw down the field with a threat, it's letting teams play heavily towards the run, which Florida was able to do in that game a lot. The best Georgia's been able to do is sort of pick teams apart at the second level. Now, you kind of see two parts to it. One, it's only really now that we're doing this video that I see a pattern, or see the pattern here. Florida's, if you look at their pass defense stats and their yard per attempt allowed, it pretty much exactly tracks with the seniority and the awareness, I think, of the quarterbacks they've faced. So lots of yards to LSU, into Georgia. Decent yardage to what I thought was actually a pretty good quarterback in Williams, at least in that opener. Kentucky was a weird game, and it's kind of hard to evaluate them because, injuries have hit them later in the season. But when you look at the bad games in particular, Tennessee, Townsend, Auburn, South Carolina, those were a lot of freshman quarterbacks or bad quarterbacks in those games. And that's where Fromm was able to excel, and that's where he's going to be able to excel for them, is that playing teams where they can kind of, West Coast move the ball down the field a little bit at a time in the short passing game, because I think Fromm is actually underrated this year in how well he's operated the offense. The problem is they just don't have downfield threats, and there's no way for him to be explosive because I don't think any of the receivers are able to get enough separation and they have enough polish to be able to get open, and then when they're open, they often don't finish the play. To answer your question, I think if they're facing, let's say, an LSU or an Alabama, they're going to need to run the ball well because those two teams are going to score points, I think. And Georgia's defense is very good, but those two offenses are operating at a higher level than I think we saw anybody in the SEC do last year. And Georgia was able to largely shut down Tua. I think that was more a function of Alabama's offense not really running well at the end of the year. And I think whoever wins, be it LSU or Alabama, let's put it this way, the team that wins that game is probably going to be a team that can handle moving the ball on a really good defense, whoever happens to win. If Alabama can't do it, then LSU's probably going to win the game, and you'll face LSU instead. Obviously, Georgia has the inside track to the championship. The issue is the run game is not really taking over for Georgia. So if you can't throw deep, then you got to be able to run, and you can't work that short passing game consistently enough to score a lot of points. And I don't think they're running it consistently enough. So it's hard to say. I think there's going to be a hard block. And absent seeing 200-yard games against good defense, which we're not really seeing, I don't think it's going to happen. They're going to have to get more explosive in the passing game first, and I don't know that it's going to happen either. So they're going to live and die, I think, with Fromm's arm and their ability to move the ball consistently down the field. And if they face an elite offense, I just don't think they're explosive enough at the skill positions to be able to do that and put up the 30-plus points it's probably going to take to win.
So, and you kind of got into another topic that I want to talk about in Georgia that I think is a real positive, and it's kind of an unsung positive. Georgia's defense is a lot better than they're getting credit for. And I don't know what the metrics say in terms of their defensive efficiency numbers or even their scoring defensive rankings or anything like that. I haven't looked at them today. But I think 17 points to this Florida offense, which I do think is improved over where we started this year with Felipe Franks and even where it was last year. I think it's an improved offense. They've got good wide receivers. Piron's not a terrible back. And Trask is consistent. He can make some good throws. The issue for me was that they ran into a really good Georgia defense that got them off the field on third down. And in the newer style of offenses, that has become really hard for even historically elite defenses like Alabama. Last year, everybody's talking about how bad Alabama was against Clemson. Clemson was an elite plus defense. Alabama still was moving the ball between the 20s and not getting off the field. So for me, I think one of their possible saving graces is if they can't get that 200-yard game, they might still be able to hold a team to a number they're not used to offensively. Have you seen things from this Georgia defense that maybe have impressed you where you didn't think you would see it? And do you think they're unfairly underrated or not being talked about enough defensively?
Well, I said that in the preview video, and so I definitely think they're being underrated. And when you look at, again, advanced metrics are not the be-all, end-all, but it's easy for me to sit here and say, oh, yeah, Georgia's an awesome defense, period. I think it's a lot more effective for me to say why I think that or give a number. Clemson, I've lauded a lot for having an underrated defense, and right now Georgia's ahead of them. I mean, Georgia's the fourth best team defensively in SP+. They're just ever so slightly ahead of Clemson, but ahead of Clemson in SP+. And Clemson's an awesome defense at shutting teams down in the ACC. Georgia's just not getting enough credit for being a really good defense with really good players, really all over the field. It's kind of a take your poison in the secondary. I think LeCount gets a lot of credit because of his tackles, but then J.R. Reed, just quietly goes about his business and does a great job on the back end. Stokes is a phenomenal corner. They're getting Campbell back healthy. I mean, you can go down the list. I mean, Rice, Webb, there's number one at their position players everywhere. All of them are good. The defensive line's good. It's hard for me to even really point out individual guys because just they're so solid across the board as a unit. And there's just, there's so many guys like Nolan Smith playing and, Dean playing sort of just random roles in this defense that are guys that would probably absolutely start a lot of other places. And they're more talented than just about everybody else in the country defensively, if not just flat out everyone else in the country, maybe even including Alabama. Their defense is excellent. And that will keep them in every game. And even if even if the offense isn't clicking 100% and they face an LSU or an Alabama, just like the past few games, they've seen that. I think they can win any game any day of the week because that defense is capable of holding an opponent to under 30 points if they're playing top level football for themselves.
All right, let's wrap this one up and look a little bit to the future for Georgia. It does benefit them, in my opinion, that they're in the East and they can afford a loss to a South Carolina and still play their way in. We said this when we reviewed the South Carolina game. They're not out of it because they still can win the East easily and play for the SEC championship. And if they win, they're in. The flip side of that, if Alabama loses to LSU, they really have no recourse to maybe the Auburn game gets them some visibility, but they don't have a lot of recourse to get themselves back in the SEC championship. And it took Georgia beating Auburn in 2017 to vault Alabama up there. So a one loss at that point, LSU, if Georgia wins, Alabama's out. Georgia's basically controls their own destiny. The things that we've talked about in combinations, so the defense being underrated, the offense being, I think even Georgia fans, because people like to say when we criticize their team that we hate their team, we don't hate your team. I think even Georgia fans would say that the offense this year has been a disappointment. Do you feel like the offense has to get considerably better for them to make the playoffs, or just a little bit better because their defense is so good?
I think the question is has to or should. So I think the offense has to get a little bit better. I don't think they're going to win an SEC championship game absent some more consistent, better play offensively. I do think you're going to have to score at least 28 points to be able to win the game, whoever they play. Now, if they want a high probability of winning, it's going to have to be a good bit better, I think. Maybe they got like a 1-4, 1-5 chance if they get a touch better, which is kind of natural over the rest of the season. But to have a 50% chance, they need to improve significantly. Those receivers need to have a game where they kind of click and come on. And to your point, I know we're looking ahead, but I'm looking at the rest of the schedule here. Missouri, Auburn, A&M, and Georgia Tech. That's 3 games against, I would say, 3 live teams. Missouri is as schizophrenic a team as I've ever seen in the East. Bizarrely so. So I don't even know what they'll get out of it, but sometimes Missouri plays really good defense. They're good run defense. Auburn is an excellent defense, and they're going to test, I think, Georgia's ability to just continually move the ball. A&M, probably very underrated. They've been a much better defense than they were the past couple of years. Maybe took a step back against the run, I would say, and took 2 or 3 steps forward against the pass. Those are 3 games where it's going to give Georgia an opportunity to be tested and to take a step forward offensively, and for those receivers to continue to gain confidence and polish so that somebody other than Cager can step up. Then you get a nice tune-up against probably the worst Georgia Tech team in like 30 years, and then you go in the SEC championship game. So I don't think it's far-fetched. I think Georgia has a very good chance of going undefeated the rest of the schedule, but there does need to be improvement, and there's opportunities for it. So we're gonna continue to watch, and we're gonna be as critical as we always are. But know that when we're being critical with an eye towards how you're gonna do against LSU and Alabama. And we don't need to see good or okay or, yeah, we did a good job this week against Missouri. We really need to see, yeah, we played excellent football, and we showed how, we dominated Missouri in a way that shows we can make the playoff. That's the standard Georgia needs to hold themselves to, and they've got several weeks to do it. So it'll be interesting to see how it pans out.
Yeah, and it's a good point that you made in that we're critical because for us, the Georgia standard now at this point is national championship. the way you're recruiting, the way you have been able to play in the past. You've already won a playoff game this early into Kirby Smart's tenure. That's the standard, so we're going to criticize you as if you were playing in Alabama or an LSU or an Ohio State. And right now, I don't see it. It is interesting, the games that you pointed out that they have on their schedule. I do want to see a 34-10 against a Missouri. I want to see them dominate somebody, because I don't think we've ever seen one of these teams be a clear-cut playoff contender where they didn't have a game where they dominated a good team. And none of those teams I would say are great, but I also think if they struggle with an Auburn, with an A&M, now we have multiple data points of struggling against good defenses. And at that point, it tells me that they probably would struggle in an SEC championship game. But that's why they played the games. We thought they had some struggles on offense last year and just came out and punched Bama in the mouth. Haymakers early. So that Jake Fromm player is still on this team. They just need to, I think, call the games a little better for him. All right, y'all. That is our review of this game. It was kind of a fun watch. It's a weird game. Georgia came out on top. Josh taking a victory lap, and me, Daniel, taking an L. That's all right. I'm used to it. That's why I can do it with such grace. Thanks so much, y'all. Have a great week, and God bless.